This tutorial is a review on grade 10 material. I'm going over maximum or minimum of a quadratic function. In grade 9, you learned about linear functions, and then in grade 10, you learned about quadratic functions. Now, each of the questions in this tutorial are all going to be in standard form. And if I want to find the maximum or minimum, I have to put it into vertex form. Because what happens is when you have your quadratic, the vertex is going to tell you if there's a maximum or, in this case, a minimum. Okay, so our goal today is to change all of the standard forms into vertex forms. And we do that through completing the square. Okay, so completing the square, what you do is you first put brackets around anything that has an x. So anything that doesn't have an x, it's going to stay outside of the bracket, so that 8's going to stay outside. We're going to just write the exact same thing that we wrote before, except this binomial, I actually want it to be a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so I want a positive 9 at the back, and I'll explain a little bit more why later. Okay, now how did that 9 get there? What you're going to do is you're going to take this 6, you're going to split it in half, and then you're going to square it. All right, so 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared gives you that 9. Now, that's the perfect trinomial that I wanted, but I can't just add a 9 out of nowhere. You're not allowed to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to subtract 9, because a positive 9 and a negative 9 just make 0. It's almost as if I haven't done anything at all. So it doesn't really affect the balance of the equation. Plus 8 at the back. So again, that positive negative 9 is a 0. It's like I haven't really added anything at all. Now the reason why I wanted that 9, okay, is because there's my perfect trinomial right there. It's going to be factored into two brackets that are exactly the same. Okay, so that I can write it like this. All right, that was the point of getting the 9 in the first place. But let's stop skipping a whole bunch of steps. Let's just go back. When I'm in this step, I don't want that negative 9. It's the positive 9 that I wanted inside the bracket. So what happens is this negative 9 gets kicked out, and it stays on the outside with the positive 8. I'd factor in this step the x squared plus 6x plus 9 into the two brackets, and on the outside, that red negative 9 and the 8 make a negative 1. Okay, and then what I'm going to do in the last step is I'm going to group those two x plus 3's and put a square beside it, and then that minus 1 is just going to be written beside. This is vertex form. So vertex form again looks like this. Okay. The original question asks you to find the maximum or minimum value. In this case, it's going to be a minimum because a, which is 1, right here, it's an invisible 1, is a positive. Since it's a positive, I know that the vertex or the parabola is going this way. Vertex is right in the middle, and that vertex is your h, which is negative 3, and your k, negative 1. Okay, remember that h is always the opposite of the number in the bracket. So I'm just going to say, therefore, your minimum, so this is a minimum because it's pointing upwards, your parabola is going upwards, of your k value, because that's the lowest it goes, when your x value is negative 3. Let's try it again with the next one. Okay, so we're going to put a bracket around the two that have x's. There's an extra thing in this question though. Notice that there's a 3 right here. Okay, we didn't have that before, we had a 1. All right, so because there's a 3 in front, we do have to get rid of that 3, so any number in front of that x squared has to be kicked out because all I want is an x squared in the bracket. All right, so if I take that 3 and I kick it out, that means that that 12 has to be divided by 3, and it becomes a negative 4x. Now you can always check your answer by taking the 3 and multiplying it back in and seeing if you get the 3x squared minus a 12x. Plus 11 is at the back, and you still have the y equals 2. Okay, so again, I wanted just the x squared in here because I wanted to make it a perfect square trinomial. Okay, except I need that third number now. And the way that we get that third number is we're going to take the 4. You can take negative 4, it doesn't matter. So negative 4 divided by 2 and then squared. So negative 4 divided by 2 is going to be negative 2. And negative 2 times itself is going to give me a positive 4. So now remember, you can't just add a positive 4 out of nowhere. You have to add in that negative 4 as well to balance it out and make it as if it never happened at all. You still have that positive 11 at the back. Okay. Don't forget to write the 3. X squared minus 4x plus 4. That's the perfect trinomial that I wanted. I always want that positive 4. It's the negative number that we never want, and that's what's going to be kicked out. Okay, here's the thing though. Major thing. In this case, because it's kicked out and there's a number in the front, you have to remember to multiply it with that negative 4. So that negative 4, when it gets kicked out, it doesn't become negative 4. It actually becomes negative 12 because it's multiplied by that 3 in front. All right, and plus 11. So remember, important. Y equals to 3. Let's factor that bracket. So we get x minus 2, x minus 2. They should always be the same. And then negative 12 plus 11 is negative 1. Y equals 3, x minus 2 squared minus 1. Okay, and again, it looks just like y equals a x minus h squared plus k. So that's now in vertex form. Since a is 3 and it's a positive, we know it's a minimum again because this guy is pointing upwards. Okay, the vertex is going to be positive 2 and negative 1. So therefore, we have a minimum of your k value, which is negative 1, when x equals positive 2. I'm not going to go over the solutions for these last two. What I'm going to do instead is, they look kind of crazy, so I'm just going to start them off for you, but they're essentially the exact same steps. If I wanted to complete the square for c, what I'm going to do is put the brackets around, and if there's a number in front of the x squared, I'm going to kick it out. So negative 0.003 is going to get kicked out of the bracket. And what's left is just the positive x squared, which I want. And positive 0.6 is going to be divided by negative 0.003 to give me negative 200x. Okay, and again, you could always check by multiplying it back in and seeing if you get the original question. That negative 10 is going to stay on the outside, and we're not going to forget our y equals 2. Okay, so I just started it off, and now it looks like a pretty simple question, very similar to B, and you can finish it off yourself. Now the last one, the only trick here is that they've put the x squared second and then the x first. And we don't really like it in that order because the x squared should come first. So what we can always do is we can always just rewrite it, negative 3x squared and positive 6x. And then we do it just like we would do question B or question C. So brackets around those that have the x's, There's a 0 on the outside, but that's okay, it doesn't matter. Okay, and then whatever is in front of the x squared, we're going to have to kick out. The -3 is going to be kicked out. And once we factor it, we get x squared minus 2x. And then we just continue to complete the square, and we'll get it in the vertex form.